Cold rain had been washing over Pittsburgh since nightfall. Katherine Whitlock stood hidden behind a double stack of shipping pallets. Her cheap company raincoat dripped onto the concrete, her cap pulled low to hide her face. 11 at night, 3 voices carried through the cold air behind the tall steel shelving. Men laughing, their cruel words sharp and ugly. They were plotting to fire the struggling single father before the end of the month. She gripped her clipboard tighter as her breath plumed white in the freezing warehouse. Then Marcus Hale sneered the name Holloway. She did not move an inch. She had run these undercover ghost shifts for 3 years now, ever since her father passed away. Once a quarter, you swap the Billionaire corner office for a cheap yellow raincoat. You grab a fake name tag and walk the warehouse floor to hear the truth about your empire. Her father had strictly demanded this for 40 years. He always said, a company can lie to you in a quarterly report, but it can never lie to you at 2 in the morning when nobody knows who you are. This specific warehouse had flagged 3 anonymous complaints over the last 8 months. Every single issue had been swept under the rug by her regional director. Each of them hinted at a cruel pattern. Tonight her cheap name tag read Kathy Voss. After 4 days undercover, she noticed Dan Holloway. He moved differently than the lazy slackers. On her very first night she saw it. The man didn't waste a single step. He carried heavy pallets himself, where other workers would have waited for a forklift. He did it all without a single complaint or show. He wore a faded gray flannel shirt under his safety vest. She spotted a rough bandage on his thumb, the kind a tired single father wraps in the dark alone. The supervisor paired them on the second night, telling her to watch Holloway. He won't say much, but you'll learn how the job is actually done. He kept quiet, but when she messed up wrapping her very first pallet, with the plastic film bunching up, this hardworking father stopped his own task to help. You are pulling against yourself, he gently said, taking the heavy roll with his cold hands. Secure it 3 times at the bottom, then pull it up, he explained, handing it back. That way you'll save your wrists. That was all he said. He returned to his work around 9, right before his phone buzzed inside his pocket. He took a single step back, turning away to answer the call privately. His deep voice softened instantly into a tone only a loving daughter would recognize. Hey, sweetheart, yes I know, I promise I will be there, front row. After a pause, I love you too, go to sleep. Mrs. Pearson is there till I get home. Then, even softer, yeah, I'll kiss your hair when I get home. Good night, Lily. He hung up and stood frozen for a second, his hand resting on the phone in his pocket. Just then, the cruel shift leader Marcus Hale walked right past him. He wasn't passing by accident, he was looking to mock the struggling dad. Does the princess miss her daddy? Dan simply nodded once, refusing to turn around. He picked up the next heavy pallet while Katherine quietly watched the back of his neck. She noticed the slow, calm breath he took before lifting. Watching this dedicated father, she realized that whatever she was seeing, it wasn't fear. It was the quiet pride of a father who decided long ago his dignity was not for sale. He was their best employee. It was a look she had only seen in her father once, back when the company almost went under in 2008. He stood in the lobby at 3 in the morning, telling a room of terrified managers they would make payroll by Friday. He had no idea how yet, but they were going to. It was the resolve of a man who had paid his dues and refused to be shaken. She returned to her Shadyside apartment at 1:40 in the morning. Keeping the lights off, she poured herself a single finger of bourbon. Without taking a sip, she opened her laptop on the kitchen island. She logged into the executive console using the strict security her lawyer always insisted on. Her father built that portal in 1998. He was one of the first shipping executives in the nation to insist on direct, unfiltered, real-time access to every single employee file, every payroll line, every disciplinary action, and every complaint right down to the warehouse floor. He always said that the moment a leader loses touch with the floor, the business begins to die in secret. She inherited that system along with the physical building. She quickly pulled up Daniel Holloway's employment record. 2 years, 3 months at Whitlock Freight. 0 write-ups, 0 complaints, and 3 formal requests asking for a day shift transfer so he could care for his daughter starting 3rd grade. All 3 requests were denied by the regional director with a cold form letter citing operational needs. She stared at the denials. The name at the bottom was Marcus Hales. The heartless responses were identical down to the comma. She scrolled to the bottom of his file to check his work history. Strangely, the section where his past work should be was completely empty. Just one line: military service classified by the Department of Defense Tier 1 C-13, restricted access. Leaning back from the monitor, she grabbed her phone. She had not dialed this specific contact in 19 months. It belonged to an old government contact who had retired into the kind of operations nobody talks about. She texted 4 words: Daniel Holloway, Pittsburgh, then made coffee. Watching the rain streak the window, she waited. 40 minutes later, her phone buzzed. Silver Star recipient, Hellman, 2014. Special Forces team leader. He earned his quiet the hard way. Do not take it from him. Placing the phone face down, she sat motionless in the dim light for a long time. Only the hum of the fridge broke the silence as cars hissed by on the wet street below. The man who showed her how to wrap cargo just 4 hours ago, who quietly endured Marcus Hale's cruel mockery without even looking up, was actually a highly decorated hero of the United States Army. He had led soldiers in the most dangerous territory on Earth and earned the nation's 3rd highest honor. And yet he spent hours on his feet in a cold warehouse on the night shift just to secure health care for his daughter. She remembered the dirty bandage wrapped around his thumb. She remembered the quiet, humble way he handed her the wrap and went back to his station. A Silver Star recipient showing a stranger he believed to be a temp how to anchor the wrap to protect her wrists. But she didn't cry. Katherine Whitlock did not cry at her father's funeral, and she wouldn't start now. Under her fake driver profile, Katherine opened a second tab, pulling the 3-year regional ledger. The Billionaire set her mug down very carefully. A massive sum did not belong, $1.4 million, quietly pocketed over 23 months. Exactly what a clever thief would steal, assuming the Billionaire owner would never actually come down to the floor to look. The following night on shift, a massive pallet slipped from the 2nd tier of the dock. A terribly stacked, top-heavy load. A hazard that should have been restrapped at intake, but lazy managers ignored it. As the forklift backed away, the corner of the top crate snagged on the high shelf. In a terrifying silent second, the entire stack tilted directly over the warehouse floor. A young worker named Raina stood completely unaware, working right underneath the falling hazard. Raina saw nothing. Katherine, 20 feet away, spotted the danger but had no time to shout. Then Dan Holloway reacted. He crossed the concrete in 3 calm strides, not shouting, just closing the distance like a man who knew every inch of this warehouse floor. With one hand, he grabbed Raina by the arm and yanked her out of harm's way. Simultaneously, he threw his opposite shoulder directly beneath the massive, plunging wooden crate. The heavy box slammed into his neck and shoulder, but he absorbed the massive blow. He braced against it with the quiet strength of a true, hard-working professional. His legs buckled slightly under the crushing weight, but his hand gripped the steel rack, forcing the load back into place. He secured the heavy load gently, not dropping it, secured. Raina covered her mouth in shock. The entire line stopped. "Are you okay?" he asked her softly. She could only nod, too shaken to speak a word. "Go get some water and sit for 10 minutes. He quietly brushed off his uniform. Then the heroic father glanced back at the useless shift supervisor who was just staring. The upper shelf needs restrapping. The 3rd shift was incredibly sloppy. He returned to work. No screaming, no demanding to know who caused the mess, just pure unmatched work ethic. No bragging. He grabbed his clipboard and quietly resumed his duties. The undercover billionaire could not ignore his heroism, and she sought him out at lunch. She carried her lunch tray out to the rainy loading dock, joining the quiet, struggling father where he always sat isolated from the others. He stared down at his meager meal. "You did not bring any lunch," he observed. "How would you know? You have not even looked up." The struggling dad reached into his worn lunch bag and pulled out a single apple. He sliced the fruit in half with a pocket knife, offering her the larger portion across the table. "Take it. I had a huge breakfast." She accepted it. The shared apple tasted remarkably sweet and fresh. As she ate, the disguised billionaire studied this humble, hard-working man staring silently out at the cold, pouring rain. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded, asking no personal questions, completely respecting the boundary of a fellow warehouse worker. He did not judge her or try to decipher her disguise, unlike the arrogant managers inside. He just saw a tired colleague sharing a meal. Two weary souls sharing food in the middle of a freezing November night. For the first time in 11 years, the wealthy CEO was completely speechless around a worker. The unfair write-up arrived on Thursday. The power-tripping manager, Marcus, summoned the exhausted father into his pristine glass office to mock him. The petty write-up was already printed. Marcus decided the punishment and falsified the offense before this hard-working father even stepped inside the room. Leaving work early without prior authorization, Marcus sneered, refusing to look the honest man in the eye. 2 weeks ago, 26 minutes before clockout, I filled that request, Dan pleaded. It was with Maggie 2 weeks before that, Marcus said, turning the document around. The request was missing. Maggie sat in silence, her hands tightly folded in her lap. She stared at the file, then at the back of Marcus's head, opening her mouth. Without turning, Marcus quietly threatened, "Maggie, how is your brother doing with his new placement?" Maggie quickly shut her mouth, eyes filling with tears as her hands remained tightly folded. Defeated, she picked up the pen and signed her name as the witness. A single tear rolled down her nose, but she did not even wipe it away. Dan watched her sign, staring at her pain-stricken face for a long, quiet moment. Then he reached across the table, gently took the pen from her hand, and signed his own name. His hand gripped the edge of the table tightly after he set the pen down. It was the only part of him that showed any sign of his anger. As we watch closely, Katherine is standing near the glass partition, pretending to sort through paper receipts. She counted the seconds, exactly 12 seconds between the moment he signed and when he stood. He walked calmly out of the office, making sure not to slam the door. Without a single glance at Marcus, he went right back to the warehouse floor. Later that afternoon, she drove to Glenshaw Elementary in a rental sedan under an assumed name. She parked just across the street. She watched eager parents file into the auditorium, phones raised, rushing to get the best seats. She stayed outside. The recital started right at 3 p.m. Through the open side door, she heard the small piano and a teacher guiding kids into line. A girl with a brown ponytail stepped up to the microphone, 8-year-old Lily Holloway. Her dress was slightly loose around the shoulders as she began to sing. It was an old folk song, something beautiful about a little sparrow. At 3:03 p.m., the back door opened and Dan quietly slipped inside. His hair was damp from washing off warehouse dust, a paper cup forgotten in his hand. He found a seat in the back row. Lily was already 3 lines in. She looked up and saw him. Her little face stayed calm, and she kept singing. A tiny smile tugged at the corners of her mouth as she kept going. Katherine quietly started her engine and drove away before the song even finished. She had no right to share that private moment, and she refused to ruin it. She drove back to the city with the radio off and the wipers ticking, keeping completely silent. But somewhere on the bridge over the Allegheny, her hand on the wheel tightened into a furious, shaking fist. She worked through the rest of the night. By dawn, back in her apartment after a grueling shift, she finally uncovered the truth. 14 single parents had been fired in 18 months, all under manager Marcus Hale. The excuses were nearly identical, always blaming minor attendance issues. Bad attitudes, poor teamwork, and performance issues that didn't match real data. 3 were proud veterans, 2 were caregivers to elderly parents. One worker had even filed an official human resources complaint before being fired. But that complaint was quickly filed away and quietly buried by the regional director. She pulled up their employee badge photos, arranging them in a grid on her second monitor. 14 honest faces, a nurse's aide, a former Marine, a dedicated woman who served the company for 9 years before losing her husband. Katherine stared at each face, ready to fight for their justice. Her father had taught her to look past the numbers on a balance sheet, seeing the real story hiding behind them. And the story behind these numbers showed a corrupt manager building his own private kingdom right inside her father's company. One quiet, ruthless termination at a time. If you look closely, she uncovered the struggling father's massive medical debt on an unauthorized credit report her lawyer pulled anyway. Over $47,000. 2 years of chemotherapy for his late wife that heartless insurance refused to cover. The collection account remained fully current. He was chipping away at it, paying $312 every month, without ever missing a single payment. He endured the brutal warehouse job for the health insurance and for his daughter Lily. She pictured little Lily, standing completely alone at the microphone in her school auditorium. Her tiny back held straight, wearing a cheap dress that was too big in the shoulders. She thought of his third desperate request for a day-shift transfer, and the cold, automated rejection handed to him in the parking lot after his shift. Another tired worker, Maggie Olson, grabbed her arm on the way to the bus. "You're new here, right, Kathy?" Katherine nodded. Up close, Maggie looked far older than she did inside the office. With red-rimmed, exhausted eyes, she whispered a warning, "Stay far away from Marcus Hale." Her voice dropped to a whisper, "I mean it. Do not let him find out anything he can weaponize against you. Not your family, not your past, and definitely not your debts, because he keeps a blacklist. He memorizes it, writes it down on paper, and he will use it to destroy you. I'm warning you because nobody warned me." Releasing Katherine's arm, she muttered, "I'm sorry. I just needed to tell someone tonight." Then, she vanished across the wet asphalt before Katherine could utter a word. Katherine stood motionless under the yellow street lamp for a very long time. She didn't bother heading back toward the bus stop. Instead, she walked 4 blocks to her own luxury car, parked under an alias, and climbed inside. Sitting in the dark with the engine off, she dialed her head attorney at home. "Bring me a forensic accountant," she commanded. "Do it today. Find someone local with zero ties to us and hire a private investigator who knows how to handle a corrupt director who blacklists his employees." A heavy, stunned silence stretched across the other end of the line. Her general counsel had served her father faithfully for 31 years. He did not ask why. By noon, he promised, and she hung up. She sat in the dark, gripping the steering wheel as fury washed over her. Think about this. She wrote one promise on the back of a parking ticket and slipped it in her wallet. "I am not leaving Pittsburgh until this is finished." Then on Tuesday, Frank Bowers cornered her. At 68 years old, the part-timer was kept around for his strong hands and bad jokes. And he was a tough former Marine from 1968. He had been quietly watching her. Ever since she arrived, she realized, as he pulled her aside near the break room coffee station. He placed a paper cup of black coffee directly in front of her. "You don't walk like a regular delivery driver," he observed, his face completely unreadable. "You walk like a leader, someone used to people clearing a path. I always spot that. I figured it out Monday." Instantly, Katherine's hand went completely still on her cup. Frank shook his head. "Relax, I am not going to ask. I do not care about your identity. I only care about why you are here," he stated sincerely. "Marcus Hale," she whispered. He exhaled sharply through his nose. "Then we are on the same side." Sitting down as his bad knee popped, he asked, "You've been keeping an eye on Holloway?" "I figured." She nodded quietly. "Let me tell you the truth about Holloway. 2 winters ago, my grandson Eli was trapped inside Eastview Junior High in Erie when a kid walked in with a shotgun. You remember that one? 3 dead, 12 hurt. Eli was in the gym." Frank stared down at his coffee, avoiding her eyes. "My daughter called me at 1 in the morning. I was on shift here, couldn't drive. I was on 3 medications, hadn't slept in 2 days, and the roads were sheer ice all up the lake. I told Holloway I had to go. He just stared at me for about 2 seconds. Then he said, 'Get your coat.'" Frank stirred his cup with a used plastic stirrer. "He drove me 9 hours through that blizzard, didn't say more than 10 words the whole way. Got me to the hospital in Erie by 10 the next morning. Ellie was alive, shot in the leg, but he survived. Before we left, Holloway slipped a check for $5,000 in my hand and just walked away. I ripped it up in the parking lot, drove back and tried giving him the pieces. He just looked at me and said, 'You paid that already, Sergeant.' 10 years ago." Frank looked up. "Now here is the part you don't know. I was his platoon sergeant the year he first joined up. Before selection, before he was anyone, I was the one who taught him to clean a rifle. He outranked me by the time he was 26, and he never once made me feel it. Not once." The break room hummed under the harsh fluorescent lights. "He is the best man I ever served with," Frank said. "And Marcus is trying to break him because he knows Dan won't defend himself. He will only fight back for others, so Marcus is making it about the kid." He nudged the warm coffee a bit closer to her. "I am 68 years old, my knee and heart are shot, and I just do not know what to do with this anymore." So I am telling you because you walk like someone who can handle it. Katherine gripped the hot paper cup tightly, ignoring the heat. She was finally seeing the truth about this place. She finally understood why a hero like Dan Holloway hid his real name to work midnight shifts on a loading dock. He did not consider any of it to be his. The patents, the metals, even the air in his lungs, to him they were all debts to repay. He was chipping away at them, just like the $312 he paid on his kids' chemo bills every single month. Setting the coffee down, she quietly said, "Thank you, Sergeant." Frank offered a small nod. "Do not mention it, ma'am." By Friday, Marcus made his move. At 4 in the morning, Katherine watched the betrayal unfold from her apartment on the Camera 19 feed. She had quietly accessed those security feeds 2 days before. Without tipping off security, she watched Marcus sneak onto the empty loading dock in his regular clothes. Long after the night shift went home, he rolled a hand truck straight to the high-value cage in the back. The very cage containing the expensive cardiac parts and medical GPS modules for their biggest client. He sliced open the seals on 12 boxes and loaded them up. Then, he wheeled them right out to the worker parking lot. But he did not load them into his own vehicle. Instead, he hid them in Dan Holloway's truck bed, pulling the tonneau cover shut to seal the trap. He went back inside to fake the security seal, while Katherine watched every move from her kitchen. She did not blink as it happened, silently memorizing every single time code. At 7 the next morning, Marcus smugly reported 12 expensive medical units missing from the secure cage, pointing the finger directly at the midnight transfer that Dan Holloway had signed for. By 8:30, he had the security guard photograph the stolen boxes hidden in Dan's truck. By 9, Marcus had cornered the struggling father in his glass office. "This is termination for cause," Marcus sneered, "theft. We won't press charges out of pity for your family situation, but you leave today and never return," Marcus mocked. The struggling father silently stared at the tyrant across the table. Maggie stood by, the only human resources witness forced to watch the cruelty. She tried to speak, but Marcus silently slid a blackmail folder toward her, keeping his eyes on the father. Seeing her brother's name on the tab, she was instantly silenced. Her hand trembled on the edge of the table so hard that the folder vibrated. The father saw her fear. "Where do I sign?" he asked quietly, and put pen to paper. He stood up and packed his few humble belongings into a small cardboard box. A photograph of his sweet daughter swinging. A laminated saint's medal on a broken silver chain. A folded piece of notebook paper, its creases worn soft from years of being opened. He quietly shut his locker. In the corridor, he passed the disguised billionaire, Katherine, who was pretending to file an inventory slip on her clipboard. The kind father stopped, reached into his jacket, and pulled out half an apple wrapped in a napkin. Placing it near her hand, the best employee in the building smiled. "Take care of yourself, kid." As he walked away, the stunned billionaire stood there for 5 long seconds. She left the precious gift, slowly taking off her worker's cap. She pulled her phone from the inside pocket of her dirty jumpsuit. She stepped 2 paces to the left, framing herself perfectly in the glass of Marcus's office window. Staring right at the tyrant through the glass, she dialed her phone. "Megan," she commanded, loud enough to cut through the wall. "Prep my private jet. Call the board. Pittsburgh Tower, 9th floor conference room, 9 a.m. tomorrow. All of them, I am coming in." Marcus's face froze for a second, then completely changed. The color drained slowly from his face, as if someone had just unplugged his entire power source. The powerful billionaire held his terrified gaze through the glass. Then she turned and walked out into the pouring rain. The massive Whitlock Freight Tower stood tall at Grant and 7th in downtown Pittsburgh. The 9th floor conference room had a glass wall looking out over the Monongahela. At 8:59 on Saturday morning, the 7 board members sat around the massive walnut table. They sipped coffee and checked phones, wondering why a sudden emergency meeting was called on a weekend. At the far end of the table sat Marcus, wearing his only decent suit. He was ordered to arrive at 8:45 with no explanation. At 9 sharp, the door opened. Katherine walked in, wearing a black suit and no jewelry. The face illuminated by the lights was the exact same face Marcus had seen working behind the warehouse pallets at midnight on Tuesday. Recognition hit him instantly as she entered. He froze in terror, but she ignored him completely. Walking to the head of the table, she dropped a stack of 14 files. She slid them down the long table, one to each stunned board member. "Here are 14 wrongful terminations from this region in the last 18 months, she declared. "And every single one of them is a struggling parent." Every termination was signed by the same director on nearly identical fabricated grounds. A simple copy-paste job. In 11 of these 14 cases, no violation ever occurred. Then she slid a second folder forward. She handed him a forensic accounting report, covering the last 23 months. Over $1.4 million in overtime budget meant for Pittsburgh was routed through a West Virginia shell consultancy straight to a man named Brian Viteur. He is the regional director's brother-in-law. She spoke without raising her voice. She slid a drive forward. This is 14 minutes of footage from camera 19, filmed early Friday morning. The corrupt regional director. He personally loaded 12 high-value medical components to frame the struggling father he fired for theft that afternoon. Marcus opened his mouth to lie. She slid a sheet of paper toward him. The federal seal at the top was real. The signature at the bottom was authentic. The date was today. "This is a sealed indictment," she told him. "Wire fraud, criminal conspiracy, and falsifying federal employment records." The United States Attorney's Office was kind enough to expedite this indictment. "I am not the one prosecuting you, Mr. Hale. I am only the one telling you that you do not work here anymore." 2 officers entered the conference room. They kept the arrest completely quiet. They escorted Marcus out without cuffs past the 7 board members, the disgraced director unable to look at any of them. He stared at the carpet. Katherine waited until the door closed. Then she announced that Margaret Olson would serve as acting regional director for the Pittsburgh branch, effective immediately. A full investigation into every firing Marcus signed begins first thing Monday morning. The 14 falsely accused employees on this list must be contacted today. They get full reinstatement, 18 months of back pay, and complete benefits restoration. This is entirely non-negotiable. She picked up her phone. She looked toward the doorway. "Megan, where is Daniel Holloway right now?" "The state unemployment office on Butler Street, ma'am. He filed at 8 a.m. Katherine bypassed the company car entirely and grabbed her own keys. She slipped down the service elevator straight to the parking garage. She drove out in the old gray Volvo her father bought in 1996, which he had refused to ever replace. The crowded unemployment office on Butler Street had a simple brown bench outside the entrance for people who needed a moment to breathe. There sat the struggling father, clutching his paperwork on his knee, trying to find hope. He was still wearing that same worn canvas jacket from the warehouse dock. Katherine quietly sat down on the bench beside him. Neither spoke for 2 minutes. Finally, the honest worker spoke without looking up from his form. "Took me a while, but I recognized you from the annual report last year. Different hair, but those same hands." He quietly checked another box on his unemployment form. Whitlock with a T. Katherine apologized softly for keeping her true identity a secret. He nodded slowly. "I understand undercover work. I used to live in it." He finally looked at her, his tired gray eyes showing no shock at all. "Were you the one who got Hale fired at 9 a.m.? he asked. He stared across the busy street, letting the heavy news sink in. "So Maggie is the new director as of today," he muttered. A massive weight seemed to lift from his shoulders, a relief almost too small to see. "I want to offer you your job back," she said softly, "with full back pay and a promotion to corporate logistics design. The salary would be 10 times your current dock wage, and you can choose your own hours." She came to ask him herself. He quietly considered it. He sat in deep thought as a nurse walked past them into the clinic and a city bus hissed at the corner. "No," he gently refused, thanking her. She didn't argue. "I just want a year," he said, "to spend with Lily. She turned 8 in August. I've worked nights for 2 years and missed too much. I am taking this year for her. Then I will figure out my next job." He folded the offer letter. "Thank you, truly." She simply nodded. She quietly watched a pigeon strut along the concrete curb. "The Carter Stillwater Trust," she noted quietly. "The patents we licensed through it. The route optimization algorithms. They are actually yours, aren't they?" He turned and looked her in the eyes, for the first time since they met. Dan Holloway looked startled. He remained quiet before finally saying, "They are not mine. They belonged to 6 men who never returned with me from Helmand. 3 of them helped me write the early math. I hold them in trust. I only take enough to pay what insurance won't cover. The rest sits there until I find the right use for it. I haven't figured that out yet. Why hide it, she asked. Because the names on that paperwork are not mine to use, he explained. And because nobody needed to know. Hearing this, Katherine stood up. She pulled a small white card from her coat pocket. It had no title or company logo, just a handwritten phone number. Setting it on the bench, she said, "Call me when you want to talk, not about work." She walked back to her Volvo, never looking back to see if he took it. 3 months later, in mid-December, Pittsburgh was covered in its first real snow. On a Saturday afternoon, Katherine drove to Squirrel Hill with a bag of groceries beside her. She spent the drive convincing herself that she just happened to be passing through his neighborhood. She knew that was a lie. Honestly, she did not care one bit. His house on Murray Avenue was small, cozy, and built of wood, with colorful Christmas lights strung along the porch rail. She climbed the steps and knocked. The door opened instantly. "Dad," Lily called out, her face beaming. "It's Kathy." She had met Katherine twice before. First at a riverside coffee shop, where Dan introduced her simply as a friend. And once during a Sunday stroll in Frick Park, where Lily insisted on holding Katherine's hand along the icy parts of the path. The little girl knew nothing of the company, the private jet, or the 24th floor. To her, Katherine was just the lady who laughed at her dad's silly jokes, and who never talked down to her like she was just a 4-year-old. Inside, the kitchen smelled of sweet vanilla and butter. A row of holiday cupcakes cooled on the rack, with 3 bags of colorful icing on the counter. Without asking, Lily handed one of the icing bags straight to Katherine. "You do the green ones." "Dad is terrible at green." Katherine let out a genuine laugh. Soft and spontaneous. She had not laughed like that in 10 years of running the corporation. Dan stood by the kitchen sink, drying his hands with a towel. He quietly watched the 2 of them across the kitchen island. Lily stood tall on her step stool, red icing smeared across her cheek. Katherine frosted a cupcake with the intense focus she once reserved for high-stakes business deals. The mocked, struggling father stayed silent for a long time. Then the quiet worker stepped around the island to grab a clean towel. Passing behind the disguised billionaire, the struggling dad reached for the drawer, his hand lightly brushing hers for a fraction of a second. Katherine didn't pull away as the honest employee grabbed the towel. He gently draped it over her shoulder to clean the icing, then returned to the sink. "You two," his little girl Lily shouted from her step stool, "you have to judge. You have to decide which one is the best. Dad says they're all great, but that's a lie." They walked over, the 3 of them staring down at 14 very messy, lopsided cupcakes. Outside, soft winter snow fell quietly over the modest street where the struggling father lived, blanketing the dim porch lights, the old parked cars, and the small wooden homes nearby. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked softly at the falling snow. His sweet little girl giggled at her own joke about a cupcake named Gerald. No company announcements would mark this, no massive headlines. The greatest truths this disguised billionaire was discovering were always the quietest. A brief touch over a towel, a child's pure laughter warming this modest home in December. The mocked veteran who had carried the names of 6 fallen soldiers for 10 years. Finally letting this disguised billionaire help him carry that heavy, painful burden. Another name, his own.